at one rental at a time, we are truly lucky to have Lance Lambert from Fortune, aka News Lambert from Twitter, because he is housing, housing, housing. He is data and data only. Something he brought out on Twitter the other day, which I think is phenomenal, is he did a review of the top 40 real estate markets. He looked at first time or entry level. He looked at median or average or middle. And then he looked at luxury. And what he did is he really uncovered what is going on, not at the 40 level, but really across 120 different variables, because each market has 3 different activities. Lance, I thought it was a genius way to do it. I think the visualizations were perfect. Let's show everybody and let's talk about it.
Yeah, and housing, always a lot going on. And, this is something that you in particular have talked about for a while, which is the very top end, much cooler, much more rate sensitive, and the bottom end, a lot more heat. And a big part of that is because when there's an affordability shock, people don't just say, hey, I don't want to live in a home. One of the things they do on the affordability adjustments is change their expectations. So some of the people from the top go down, kind of move their expectations. And then another thing is that affordability shock makes it much harder to, go out and buy a new home and to give up that home. And so where does that hit the supply the most? Well, it hits the demand for the higher end because you have one less buyer at the top, but it's less supply at the bottom. So the dynamics of a mortgage rate shock hits more acutely at the top and less so at the bottom.
And I think it's really subtle, because if you're lucky enough to be in a situation where you're shopping for a luxury home, it's optional. 90 some odd percent of the time you live somewhere already, and it's likely very nice. Mm-hmm. So if rates explode to 8% or whatever they are at, it's optional. You don't have to make that move. You can wait. The real rub in all of this, and why most people got the housing market wrong, is it's the move up buyer who no longer is moving up, right? The person who used to say, we need the extra bedroom, we want a nicer school, we want a nicer thing, we're willing to pay an extra 50 or 70K. But now if you pay an extra 50 or 70K and your rate doubles, you might get a no answer from a mortgage broker, right? It's not even an option. And then, of course, if you don't do that, where the real problem is there's no listing or inventory at the bottom of the market. You only have death, divorce, life events. And this is where we are probably for the next several years, if I'm right. So, but you have a chart that's beautiful.
Let's jump into the data here. So this is Zillow data, and how it's determined is the lower price tier is homes in the 5th percentile to the 35th percentile. So the bottom third of the market. Yep. The middle tier is the 35th percentile to the 65th percentile. And we're in terms of price. And every market is based on those percentiles. So a home in the middle in San Francisco is going to be different than in the middle in Columbus, Ohio. And then the upper tier is the 65th to 95th. And what Zillow does is they take the very bottom 5% and the very top 5% and just cut them off, because there's too many outliers in those. And so that's how they make the lower price tier, the middle price tier, and the upper. And
now let me ask you a quick question, just so everybody realizes and why this chart is so important. Most of the housing data that we get monthly is median or middle. It's just tell me what's going on in the middle, which in a market that is as broken as I think it is it's not capturing the true picture, because one place is hot and one place is cold. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's right. And so here, look at Seattle in the middle. And this is the number that I report all the time for Seattle is this is the Zillow Home Value Index. And the index is actually just that 35th to 65th percentile, the middle.
Right.
So I normally will tell everybody Seattle's down 5.69 from the peak. But the truth is that at the very bottom, they're down 149 from the peak.
Exactly.
So at the peak. Middle is down, and that's enough to say, okay, there correction. Then the top, that's actually a chunk, right?
Yeah,
For
that's
here.
significant.
But to compare that very upper to the bottom, that's day and night. That's two different
It's two
worlds.
different markets. Yeah, two different
Yeah,
markets.
exactly. Yeah, they're two different markets. And what you'll see nationally is that the lower price tier just set a new all-time high. The middle price tier just set a new all-time high. And then the top is still down about 2.5%, with it ranging a lot across the country. And one thing to keep in mind here is the San Francisco and the Seattle, the tops in those markets are like on a whole nother level. And so I think that's why
Exactly.
they get hit so hard. They're just so much more rate sensitive at that level.
It's an
Relative,
optional purchase, right? San Francisco, very tech heavy. Seattle, it's optional at that point. No, very few people need, if nobody needs, a $2.5 million home or 5 million or whatever these are. They'll just wait for this craziness to end.
yeah. And there's also some sophistication to
Mhm.
those luxury buyers, where a lot of them knew during the pandemic that was the time to get a luxury home because that's
Yeah.
where the rates were.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
let's not forget commercial banks like First Republic, who no longer exists. They were known to give very wealthy people below market rates because they wanted all their portfolio. They were doing that on luxury homes.
yeah. And okay, so an interesting market is Austin, where the bottom's still down 8.9,
There you
and
go.
they're down across the board. And this is why, I talk about Austin a decent amount. It's the one place that actually has active listings. It went through a really big boom. Prices were up 62% there. It had a lot of migration from people all across the buying spectrum into the city during the pandemic, and you've had some let off there. The migration is kind of not kept up as much. And locally, there was just a big mismatch between what it would be to go get a mortgage relative to what it is to rent in that market. And there's been more softening on the rent side there than any of these other places. Plus, this is one of the few places where investors really got over their skis
Yes.
and doing one of the things that you say to not do, which is to buy alligator properties, because
Hmm.
appreciation went up so much that they weren't really interested in the cash flow. They were trying to speculate on the appreciation.
Yeah, they
So,
got. Yep.
yep, exactly. And one key part about Austin that I don't talk about much, but I think is important, is that Austin has a lot of the similarities to Vegas and Phoenix, right?
Mhm.
But one thing it doesn't have is people there aren't used to this pressurized housing affordability relative to an Austin or Phoenix. This
Right.
is a complete theory of mine, and maybe it's completely off base, but one thing I think that helps Vegas and Phoenix is that those markets are kind of used to very
Yes.
pressurized affordability. Maybe that's wrong, and also I think the investors that play in Vegas and Phoenix have a much higher risk tolerance, having gone through a 50% decline in
Hmm.
prices during the crash.
Yeah, I
Austin
think. Yep.
fell 8% during
Hmm.
the '08 crash. They've actually
Hmm.
fallen more this time than
Mm.
'08. And, Texas was infamous because they had went through the '80s and early '90s bust, that they had all those stricter lending regulations,
Correct.
didn't have the lending practices everybody else did during the early 2000s. Prices didn't boom there during the early 2000s. And then when the correction occurred, they didn't go down as much.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that's interesting about
One of the
Austin.
things I think we should highlight here for folks that I think we missed on the intros, tell them what zero means, because there's a lot of zeros on here. Tell them what zero means.
Yeah, so this isn't a year over year chart. This is a down from the peak.
Yeah.
And so a zero
Only down from the peak.
only down from the peak. Yes, exactly. And so 0.00 means you're at the peak. And what that essentially means is that in July, your market set a new all-time high for that pricing category. So
Yeah.
Cincinnati, Ohio, St. Louis, Baltimore, Miami, Philly, Kansas City, Columbus, Ohio, Indy, Cleveland, and Virginia Beach, those 11 markets all set all-time highs for low
Across the
tier, middle
board.
tier, upper tier, across the board July. Yeah, that's
Well,
how
let's
this
look
chart.
at San Jose, California. That's a market. Yeah, that's where I live in that market. We missed it. It's at the bottom. I want you to
Where's
look
it?
at San Jose, California. It's the fifth from the bottom or sixth from the bottom.
Okay. Oh, wow. Interesting. So San Jose is the pretty much the most expensive market in the country, right
Correct.
there with San Francisco. And this is wild. At the very top of the market, down 9% from peak, middle 6.54. So this is the number I report all the time. And then that bottom tier, they just set a new all-time high.
Again, I get people all the time that comment on my channel, right? San Jose, I can't find an entry level home, blah, blah, blah. No, of course you can't. San Jose, California, entry level homes, all time high. Luxury homes, down, let's call it 10%.
Yeah. And now
two different markets.
Exactly. Yeah. That's wild. Yeah. And for a year period, 9 is quite a bit. But then again, relative to how much rates went up, I don't think it's nothing too wild. And another thing is that while this is the peak, this is the down from peak chart. If you look at like a chart that's like since March 2022 or since March 2020, the start of the pandemic, this would all be at least like 40%, 35. The lowest would be like San Francisco plus like 25 since March 2020. So everyone is still up a lot since the onset of the pandemic. And the places that have given up is because we had a historic mortgage rate shock last year that followed an extreme period of overheating, and that put prices relative to fundamentals at a very tight spot. And at the upper end of the market, the luxury, which had more of a hit from demand because those move-up buyers just didn't go into the market, they gave up a little more in price. And then like the bottom, that's where the most acute supply impact happened, where supply the most. And also rents have went up a tremendous amount over the past 2-3 years. And some of that is still happening on a rolling basis, where some of those leases are still coming up. So it's a little bit of a feet under their fire for some of the people on the entry level side.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to do is I really just want to highlight one more time the difference between the low price and the upper price. How many markets? Oh, there you go. That works.
Yeah. So the biggest two gaps, the biggest three gaps in the country for top to bottom difference: San Francisco, Seattle, San Jose.
And again, to orient people on this chart, the red dot is luxury and the blue dot is entry level. And the bigger the gap, the bigger the delta.
And any market that has a red dot on 0 means that top and bottom are at all-time highs for July. Just set a new all-time high.
Wow. Wow. Can we go back to the other chart? Again, I want to look at something real quick. Sorry. How many markets in the lower end have a negative number? What's that like? 10, 2, 4,
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 30 just set all-time highs.
And then if we go to the other side and say how many have 0?
7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
So that really tells me, right? In one market, we have 30, in the lower end, 30 out of the 40 markets or 75% set all-time highs. On the other side, I don't know what it is, 22%, right? Or whatever.
29. Yeah, 29 of the 40 are
29 of the are still down, or 11 are set all-time. 11 out of the 40 set all-time highs. This is the kind of information nobody is talking about. The housing market for 40 years functioned the same. Entry level, move up, luxury, it functioned the same. Now that was obviously 40 years of declining interest rates. It's now different. We are seeing the luxury market act different. If you happen to be shopping in luxury, write disrespectful offers. If you're shopping at entry level, it is tough out there.
Yeah. I love this chart, and this is something that you were pretty much like the first two in the whole country at, essentially.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting one, and one I'm going to keep every once in a while producing.
Yeah. And then again, the second chart, I think that's even more eye-opening. This caught my attention, but the second one with the dots, that was like, that's the story I've been screaming about.
Yeah. And it's most acute in the markets or around kind of where the West Coast that you're very familiar with. And even like Sacramento still has that really big gap too. Yeah. And then Portland, it's like the same phenomenon. I mean, Los Angeles, look at Los Angeles at the peak, at the bottom, and at the top still down
Look
5.5%.
at San Jose.
Yeah, that's wild.
All-time high for the low end, big old drop for the luxury. That's
Yeah.
what I've been talking about. There you
I
go.
think what I want to do now is go make a chart that does the 6-year downturn during the crash and
Yeah.
see what it looked like there. Because Zillow has the data going back to 2000 for the price
Oh, you know
tiers.
what? That'd be really interesting. And you know what I think is going to be shocking is it from memory, um, the low, medium, and or low, middle, and upper all acted the same. But again, that's from memory. It's a faded memory, but it'll
Across
be
the
interesting
board,
to
you
see.
think?
Yeah, because it was a
Yeah,
very the shock was very different. It
yeah.
was it was it was the story. It's just a different time. So Lance, if somebody wanted to read your articles or follow you, where do we send them?
Yeah, if you want a nuanced look at the housing market and across regions, follow me on Twitter at News Lambert, or you can Google my author page, Lance Lambert Fortune.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.